Hi, this is Desiree, aka Desbot from the Nerd Element. I'm here with Michael Sinterniklaas, and he has done the voice casting directing for the English dub version of the new Miyazaki film, The Boy and the Heron. Hi, Michael.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, did I get that all right?
Yeah, you did. I mean, I casting was sort of a joint venture. G Kids
Okay,
did a lot of that as well as NYV Post. But want to make sure G Kids they did the celebrity casting on this one.
okay, but you work with the cast, correct?
Yeah, and I directed them. Yes, I was the voice
Yes.
director.
Okay, so I got that part right. Great. So, as our viewers know, The Boy and the Heron has made a big splash in America. It was the number one film this past
Yeah,
box office weekend. Second Japanese film to make a major splash this year with the box office. As we know, Godzilla minus one also is a huge hit. Um, let's talk about your work with the cast. Now, I know they've released it in two versions. They've released the Japanese subtitled in English here, and then they have the English dub, and they're both excellent. Um, G Kids has a really good reputation for doing excellent casting of voice talent with their English dubs. So, how do you, first of all, when you met the cast, what do you do to get them to that point where they're either not necessarily matching what the Japanese cast did, but having that same sort of spirit?
yeah. So that really is it starts with the casting, and my studio NYV Post and G Kids have always collaborated, I think, really amazingly well. When we cast a celebrity, you can't have them audition. So you don't ever get to try out how it's going to work before they are hired and doing the job. So we really toil over not just who might sound appropriate for the way the character looks or the way the original sounded, but also like what in their body of work indicates that they have sort of something in their soul that is an appropriate fit for this character. I think that's actually kind of the most important thing. I think an audience can suspend disbelief if the voice isn't the same, but if the character isn't served, then they're just not going to sign on for it. One of the things we do is we'll take audio from their other work or even their interviews, and then we'll marry that against the picture and see, like, even though they're saying different things, of course, and it's not performed to the picture, you can get a sense of like how it's going to jive. We also, but in thinking about the work they've done before, that's where my team especially, I think, really weighs in on how we can see this fitting into their personality. Like we talked about Dave Bautista a lot
Mhm.
going into it, and I something I like about his work is I think there's sort of there's an availability to him. I mean, it's not as relevant to the Parakeet King that he plays in this film, but I really love his work because beyond just being big and strong, there's a different access to his heart that I think is really compelling. And I think it was really well served in A Knock at the Cabin, where, the entire
Mhm.
time while he's doing something horrific, he's still so gentle, despite how, physically menacing he appears. And he
Right,
was a
right.
super sweet guy. When he came in, he wanted to do it right. He just kept saying, look, this isn't what I do. And just help me, I'll do whatever you say. I'll do it as many times as you need it. He could not have been more kind and generous. And that's another thing is like, how are they going to work? Everyone that we worked with, I think I mean, I've been really lucky. I haven't had any crazy diva experiences. Everyone I've worked with is a consummate professional, and we just want to do the best work for these incredible films. And this is perhaps the most incredible. I mean, anyone who knows and appreciates Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki is going to come into this with a sense of reverence and humility, and everybody did. And these are some of the top people in Hollywood, and they were all just grateful to be a part of this work and humble and generous and really explored things. The one exception to sort of figuring out who's going to work in the role was probably Robert Pattinson. It was important to Ghibli that we not just get like an old crusty comedian kind of person to play this role. They had hired a young hot guy, and they,
I saw the
said,
picture.
yeah, right. He's hot, he's young. And they had said like, oh, our actor is 30 years old. Please do something like we did. And of course you're not going to second guess Studio Ghibli, right? So we were like, okay, well, that was not what we had originally thought, but we have to do this, and now we have to understand why. A piece of advice I got when I studied classical theater at a conservatory was and this has stuck with me forever. Why these words and no others? If you read a script and you're like, well, I wouldn't say it this way, I would say it this way.
Mhm.
Stop for a minute and challenge yourself to figure out why the writer chose these words and not your words. Maybe there's some other insight that you haven't picked up on yet. So whenever we were told something that didn't immediately make sense, we're like, okay, then we didn't get something. It's not them making a mistake, it's their work. We have to bring ourselves to what they did. That gets into a whole other thing about the style of directing the piece, but
Mhm.
in terms of casting, Robert was the one sort of wild card where he fits the bill. He's young and hot, and he's a transformative actor, but there's nothing in his body of work that is what this Heron character is. So were we sure he would be able to do it? Well, we were pretty confident in his abilities as an actor, but that was the one like leap of faith thing. And I'm really grateful that we had access to him at all, because he showed up ready to go. There have been a lot of stories around the internet about how he came in with a recording, and that's what
Mhm.
happened. When I met him for the first time, and we thought we were going to work with him in New York. He had seen the movie at a screening room in New York that was 2 blocks away from my New York studio. NYV Post is bi-coastal, so even though NY
Mhm.
is in the title, we're NYV Post, and I guess LAAV. We're not calling it's NYAV West and New York, but
Right.
we thought we were going to record him there. I was there. Then I came back, and he ended up being in LA. And when we first met on his first day of recording, there's no rehearsal process. He said, like, oh, he loved the film. I'd heard that because G Kids had rented the screening room for him to go see it, and then they had interfaced with him more. They told me he was really enthusiastic about it. And when I met him, he was like, well, I don't know how you want to start this, but I've been working on a voice. Do you want to hear it? And I was like, yeah, you have it on your phone? And he whips out his phone, opens the memos app, and
Mhm.
I just hear the voice already. And I was like, oh, okay, extraordinary. It was done. There was no working.
Wow.
Like, he came with a voice. The only thing that I contributed to that was, the Heron has 2 modes, and Ghibli had made this point really clear
Mhm.
that when he's in his bird mode, he's more theatrical, and when he's, in his man mode, then he's the trickster, shyster, liar, and then
Right.
ultimately, right? Um, so so we distinguished the voice. We sort of bifurcated the voice and did something a little deeper, richer, more theatrical for the bird mode. And then when he's like, nah, stop it,
Mhm.
he's something else. But he came with the voice. He did it on his own. And more impressively to me, he came with the energy that was specific to the Heron. I've seen him be crazy and I've seen him be, handsome, but there's been a sort of a different sort of tempo in all the work that I've seen him do. He changed his internal rhythm to be this Heron, and then served all the modes, an enemy, a liar, and a buddy.
Right.
But it's all really served. So while there's so much talk about how transformative his voice was, what really impresses me, and what I think, people who are aficionados of Robert Pattinson will recognize, is that he didn't feel like he was the same person he's ever been before in any other thing we've ever seen him do.
Actually, 100% did not recognize him. I didn't even know which character he played. I just
Oh,
heard from
people
my
thought it was
friends.
Willem.
Yeah, well, my friends all told me that, go see the English version. It's fantastic. It matches, all the voices match the action. It's not like the kind of dubs you're sort of used to with older anime or even older Godzilla films, since we were talking about Godzilla earlier. And I'm like, oh, I heard so much about Robert Pattinson. He was the Heron. I had no idea. I loved
Yeah,
it. I didn't
awesome.
recognize. I kind of sort of recognized Dave Bautista just a little bit. It took me a while to figure out. I didn't recognize anybody else. I'm like, I was looking like, so Christian Bale was the father, and I wanted to ask you about that. So I've seen voice actors live at panels at Comic-Con, and I've talked to them, and they talk about so much about the process of the actual acting they do. And they were showing us, they're not just reading script into the, like you see some of those behind the scenes, some of them, they've got the microphone and they're just reading it. They're acting it. They're visual, their face changes, everything changes. Did you have that with this cast?
Absolutely. I think personally, acting it's physical. The trick is you have to have good mic technique. You can't be too far off. We're really lucky. In my studio, we have some larger than normal rooms. Our A room in New York is bigger than than most like New York booths. It's not a little room. It's big enough. We have Foley pits and everything. So it's larger. And then our LA room is much bigger still. And we just took possession of this building in December. We actually have a movie screen in the ADR stage. So another thing that I think is impactful to working on this movie is not just seeing it on a monitor or a TV, you're seeing it projected like a movie, and you're in the dark watching the movie as you're participating in the movie. I think those little unconscious things are things I really do try to set up for my cast so that they can sort of even unconsciously be empowered to do their best work. But, like Robert was really like hunched over and doing all this stuff. Christian found all kinds of physicality. Luca, who played the boy, we had a little wooden knife and a bookend, like little practice sword, which, shows up in the movie, and we held them and he gestures with them, and wherever possible, I think it's important to get the physicality right. So yeah, or lifting heavy things. I have weights now in the booth, and I had one actor actually carry the weights for lifting stuff. Yeah, it was great. I think the more you can engage your whole body and forget about how you're supposed to sound, the better. I mean, we don't typically think about, controlling the way I will sound when I say this word. But when you get into dubbing, you just heard a preview of what it sounded like in another language. You know the timing, you know where the pause is, and it's hard not to just sort of myopically focus on the sound so you can deliver the right, structure to fit into the pre-rendered performance. But the trick is to forget about all that and just go for it, and then we'll try to like edit things together to make sure that it fits for technical reasons, but that the performance is still as organic as it can possibly be. And I just can't get away from that technique. I think it's really important. And I mean, it might sound obvious to have a good performance, but what does that really mean? And then how do you actually elicit that? I have a lot of sympathy for being in the booth because I'm also a voice actor. And so I just do whatever I can to, set them up for success, and that comes down to the coffee that I make, or, the lighting in the room, or having a projection screen to act off of, or, a big enough font so you're not going like, what? Everything you can possibly do, because I'm asking them to be really vulnerable and risk embarrassment when I get in the booth.
I did want to ask you, I saw, what is lip flap? Did I get that term right? That's the term I'm not familiar with. So what is lip flap?
Yeah, it's like a shorthand. I mean, I don't know that it's I guess it's a technical term. It just means all the animation, right?
Okay.
So when you match the flaps, the lip flaps, because the mouths are flapping.
Right. Because I imagine that's more difficult when it's animated for an entirely different language, so that that cadence and like the flap, like you said, is set for that language, and then you're coming in with a new script. Not you personally, but I mean, you come in with a new script, and you have actors that speak a different language trying to match that.
Well, that's the other thing. The writing process is really hard. Stephanie Shea, is part of the NYV team on this. She did the script. She's extraordinary. I think she's one of the best writers doing any of this. She was nominated for doing Mirai's adaptation, and Mirai got Oscar nominated with our dub, actually. The only anime that was not a Ghibli film to be Oscar nominated. So
amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Go Hosoda. But but matching all that is really hard. And you're right. There's a lot of stuff in Japanese flap where they'll put pauses in the middle that we don't. Or, if you're saying like I, that in Japanese is watashi wa. So that's watashi wa is much longer than I. So you have to fill in other things. Or what is nani, which is how you get typically what the, which I hate. And I like to make my dubs a what the free zone, because it just sounds like dubbing. And I want it to sound like talking. I mean, that's pretty basic, but it can be really challenging to get there. So it starts with the writing. And this film in particular was really challenging because there's a tempo that's much slower, and we don't want to sound super languid on everything. So, there's different choices you can do, like where the rise and the fall could be a second word, or it's one word depending on the sentence structure and the moment. But I do think it's important that this is, recognized as a period piece. And I'm a fast talking modern person who has multiple screens in front of him, and, we're all overcharged and overstimulated. But in that time, it's a little bit different. I think a slower tempo is important, certainly for the reality stuff before he gets into the tower. And then serving it all so that it looks like it makes sense, but doesn't sound languid or awkwardly paused. It's really, really challenging. And sometimes in the middle of a sentence, we'll pause. I just did it just now without thinking about it, but it was justified by me looking for the next word. So there's sometimes going to be a performance reason to justify the pause, or you rewrite the line so it ends and then begins again so that the pause is justified by grammar. But there's 1,000 ways to, I was going to say skin this cat, but I noticed you have a cat there. So
He finally left.
okay. Well, I can say it when his back is turned. But to solve for that challenge, that maybe is a less threatening way to say it. So, yeah, but each moment is unique to itself, and there's no hard and fast rule. I mean, I think people make hard and fast rules, but I don't subscribe to them because every moment is unique, every moment is specific, and if you can be receptive in the moment to a new way of solving for it, then maybe you can innovate and do something that's more appropriate to the piece rather than imposing your will on something that someone else might have had a different idea for. It's tricky work, and it's always a high wire act, and I make my life more difficult by not having my way of doing it. It's always informed by the piece I'm receiving and then the talent that I'm working with. I want to figure out how they communicate what inspires them and then, get their creative juices flowing. I want to receive the piece for all of its smells and flavors and unique identity so that we serve its uniqueness. In the case of this film, it's the voice of Hayao Miyazaki and probably his most personal film ever. It's somewhat autobiographical. He's in the film,
Yes.
And he's been represented before. His mother, his father, that relationship. The Wind Rises it's about making World War II planes. That shows up in this film too. But I don't think anything has been so wholly unique and wholly personal and autobiographical as this. So, also trying to step out of interpreting his work for the audience was a really tricky challenge and something that I don't think I'd ever done at this level before. But because every time I've seen most dubs and even the Ghibli dubs, which have always been at a super high level, I felt here and there where it felt like someone's idea, and I always want to go back and see the original. I wanted this more than anything and more than ever to feel like the same film, no matter which way you saw it. And I still encourage people to go see it in the original format, even though I made the dub. See the sub. Please, but then also watch the dub because then you get to see the magnificence of all this art and not just focus on the bottom of the screen and then have to, read someone else's interpretation of his words. All of the translation work is interpretive. Subtitles are not necessarily a more direct way to understand the original. It's a more truncated version of what he was saying because you have to clear the screen to put up a new card. Unless you understand Japanese, you're not getting the original meaning by hearing the performances, but not knowing what they're saying. So I think the more ways you can experience it, the more you can put it together and then try to synthesize the proper experience. And I think for Hayao Miyazaki, every effort is worth it.
Thank you so much. I wanted to say how wonderful this movie was, and the dub was fantastic. If I didn't know it wasn't in English, I wouldn't know it wasn't in English. Just fits so great. And there is one last thing I wanted to do, if it's okay with you. I wanted to do a little Go Team Venture.
Hey, okay, 1, 2, 3.
Go Team Venture. Thanks.
Wait,
sorry. Yeah, we're close enough. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Again, I was talking with Michael Sinterniklaas, and who played Dean Venture on the Venture Brothers, but also has done a fantastic job with the cast, with the English-speaking cast of The Boy and the Heron. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.